Hello, I'm Hannah Barnes, Associate Editor at The New Statesman, and you're listening to The New Statesman podcast. For the next 6 weeks, we're bringing you new episodes every weekday with updates on the party campaigns, reaction from around the UK, and the best polling analysis with our experts. I'm joined today by Andrew Marr, The New Statesman's political editor, and Freddie Hayward, our political correspondent. OK, since we were last in this studio, Freddie, a lot has happened. It's been a very big campaigning bank holiday weekend. I want to start by looking at the Conservatives' headline announcement from Saturday afternoon: national service for 18-year-olds.
Britain today faces a future that is more dangerous and more divided. There's no doubt our democratic values are under threat. That is why we will introduce a bold new model of national service for 18-year-olds, to be spent either in a competitive full-time military commission over 12 months, or with 1 weekend per month volunteering in roles within the community.
What is this, Andrew? What's this plan?
This is more a headline than it is an actual announcement. The idea of some kind of national service for younger people is not a stupid idea. We are an atomised society in many ways, got huge levels of inequality. Mass migration has meant that communities are not mingling together as perhaps they once did. And so the idea of obliging younger people to, rub alongside people from a different background, put something back into the community, is not a mad idea. It's the kind of thing they do in Sweden, in Norway, in Denmark. They're looking at it in France. They're looking at it in the United States. What I think has gone badly wrong with this idea, however, is that it looks like a panicky election fix. And Rishi Sunak has branded it not as that kind of general national service, but as national service with a capital N, capital S. In other words, the national service that older voters look back to and they remember from the 1950s, when you had to go and do square bashing, get short haircuts, and, blanco your puttees and, join the military. And all of that. Now, this is mad because, first of all, the army does not want, 500,000 stroppy, unhappy 17 and 18-year-olds joining them under any price at all. They've said again and again, we do not want this. It would be a bad waste of the military budgets we've got. So it's bad from that point of view. Trying to enforce this on young people is also mad because, as ministers, James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, has already announced and admitted they're not going to be sent to prison for not going. So what is the sanction going to be? If you won't do community service, we're going to give you community service. I mean, it's completely bonkers. And then to get that far, they would have to further jam up our already jammed and creaking court system. So it makes sense to me at no levels at all, except that it did get the Tory party onto the front pages of Tory newspapers in a way that nothing has done so far. And for elderly voters who don't read closely and are enormously nostalgic for the era of Wolsey cars and Arthur Askey and caning, it'll do some good. But otherwise, completely mad as cheese.
Well, there's talk, isn't there, that parents could be fined. Like, there's going to be no criminal punishment to not doing it. And as you've said, the military don't want these 17 and 18-year-olds. And it's split, isn't it? What's the split? There's kind of a two-track thing being proposed here.
Yeah,
already.
The choice is that you can either spend 12 months in the military or you can volunteer in your local community.
Compulsory volunteering.
Compulsory volunteering, of course. Once a month, 1 weekend a month, which is something that I think, Andrew, as you said, many people would agree with. It's important to encourage young people to help out in the community in whatever way it might be. The question is how you enforce it, because, as you said, it's compulsory volunteering, whatever that means. There's also been questions about whether parents are held responsible for their children, their adult children who might not comply. The Tory party had 3 days where they couldn't answer that question, and now they finally come out and said that parents won't be sent to prison, which is a good start. But I think Andrew was right. The key point here is that it's not really about the policy, it's about the chaos that surrounds it. And that's what's distracted from it. We had 2 weeks ago, Johnny Mercer, who's the Veterans Minister, say publicly that he didn't think any form of conscription or national service was a good idea. We had another minister, Andrew Morrison, who came out in the House of Commons and said that, and that was only a week or 2 weeks ago. Within that period, they've pivoted and said, actually, no, it's essential and it's the main policy. I mean, this week's goes to the heart of the fact that the Tory party is disunified, and we've known that, we've covered that for 2-3 years now. But I think some people thought they might come together a little bit in the short campaign, and we've not seen that at all.
It's getting worse.
I don't think there has ever been any period in the past when the governing party has gone into a general election and fallen apart in so many directions so visibly. It is literally coming apart at the edges. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this before.
Steve Baker, that Brexit veteran, well-respected Tory MP, has released a statement saying that he's chosen to do my campaign work in Greece because he had a pre-booked holiday and he thought the Prime Minister had assured him that it would be in the latter half of the year and therefore he's going to go on it. Lucy Allen, who's this other Tory MP, who's still a Tory MP until Parliament's dissolved this week, has come out in support of her local reform candidate, which is...
She's stepped out, hasn't she? She's not a Tory MP anymore.
Well,
she's sacked, isn't she?
Technically, she's still a local MP until Parliament dissolves, but yes, you're right, she has left the party. Yeah, the party says we're going to kick you out. She said, well, I've already left,
resigned,
guys.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's this unity across the front.
Well,
I mean,
and also the leaking of that letter. So Conservative
Conservative
CCHQ.
Central Office had a real go at lazy, idle Tory MPs who couldn't be bothered to go out and canvass, knock on the doorstep, and who weren't raising enough money. And it named them, and it sent out this message to almost every Tory MP, including to the people they were attacking. And of course, it landed on the front page of the Times within about 5 minutes.
I mean, just before we move on from national service, I mean, even how they're going to pay for it seems slightly chaotic, doesn't it? Because £2.5 billion, apparently. The Tories saying crack down on tax avoidance evasion, but isn't it coming from levelling up money as well?
So 1 billion comes from, we're going to crack down on tax evasion, which is the last resort. Normally, if the Liberal Democrats, when they're pushed up against, we'll get money from cracking down on waste and tax evasion. Yeah, it never happens. And the rest of it is going to come from this special fund, which is basically the last money left for levelling up. It used to be part of the EU budget, but it's now used to, help impoverished communities up and down the country. The last sort of fragment from the Michael Gove, Boris Johnson levelling up money. And they're going to take that away?
Yeah. I mean, Freddie, you're the closest person here to 18.
I'm a spokesperson of my generation.
The spokesperson of the youth. Is it... I mean, I think this is probably a step too far, but reading this morning, an attack on young people, this policy. Is it?
I think many people have seen it as that. It's interesting. I think it has got some cut through on social media in terms of memes, in terms of coverage, in terms of people just taking the mick out of it in a way that other policies don't, just because it's an amusing concept to try and conscript the youth and put them on the front line when they're just vaping and scrolling through TikTok.
That in itself is not a grand political strategy. At least this policy is being ridiculed.
No, quite.
Basically, at least we've got something that people are taking.
But this is the thing about elections, right? It's the one time in the 5-year cycle where people actually start listening to politics.
Yeah,
it cuts through, and that's why we saw with Keir Starmer's speech, and maybe we'll come on to it in a minute. Keir Starmer's speech yesterday, he reiterated all of the things that we know he's been saying for 2-3 years about his background, about his childhood, about his Pebble Dash semi. Because now people are listening, they are engaged, they won't be following it every single moment of every single day, but they will be picking up on the big ideas.
So let's come on to Labour in a second, because at the opposite end, we've had national service targeting the youth, if you like, pensions triple lock plus today, obviously trying to lure the older voters. What do we think of this?
So this is a new aspect to is it the quadruple lock now? Basically what the Prime Minister is saying is that pensioners will never be taxed on their pensions. And that's going to cost 100 million in the first year. But he does that by basically reversing what would otherwise be the result of fiscal drag. In other words, we're not going to tax you after all, is all he's saying. But it does show, I think, how relentlessly the Prime Minister and the Tory party are focusing on their old core vote, in they're trying to cling on to the constituencies they still think they can hold at all costs. So yes, this is another tilt towards the older voters who do vote, and against the younger voters, some of whom don't.
Is that a mistake?
I mean, it's a retreat. They've recognised that they're not going to be able to win over many people, so they're trying to shore up their core vote. It's a tactic to try. Exactly, they're bunkering down. They're trying to keep as many seats as they can, because I think some of them have realised in the past 5 days that it's going so badly that they could face annihilation. So that's what it is, I think. I mean, it's interesting, yet again, Mel Stride, who is the minister they sent out today on the news round to announce this policy, said in 2023 that the triple lock was unsustainable. So they just keep cutting back against what they've said. And even on the tax rises, on the tax cut, this is a tax cut of a tax rise that they introduced through fiscal drag.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and also, I mean, you were saying whether people actually read the detail rather than the headlines. But if you are an older person who's going to benefit from this, it's really not very much money either, is it? £100 a year. I mean, less than £2 a week. Is that really going to be a game changer?
But they are thinking very, very hard about old chaps in stained corduroy trousers who are thinking of voting reform for the first time. That are the people they're thinking about. And that might have some effect on some of them.
To what extent is there an over-focus on the threat from reform at the expense of actually targeting Labour?
That's a really interesting question to which I don't really know the answer. I know there was internal documents from the Tory party which suggested that reform could cost them 100 seats, by depressing the Conservative vote and allowing Labour in. So in effect, it's the same argument they should be making. They should be constantly saying, vote reform, you're voting for the Labour Party. It's a Labour Party vote. Don't be fooled by Richard Tice. He's really just a front man for the Labour Party. If I was the Tories, that's what I would be saying the whole time. But I think you're right in the sense they are over-obsessed by a relatively small group of voters because they are absolutely terrified about what's going to happen on election night.
We had some good polling in Morning Call this morning from Ben Walker, and he was looking at reform voters and who they hate more. They hate Keir Starmer way more than they hate the Tories, even though they still hate the Tories. So that gives them a little bit of leeway, a little bit of space to say to people, look, we can win you over. Whether they can or not is a different question, but it's much easier for them to win over some of the Reform voters, I think, than it is some of the Labour voters.
So looking at the last few days for Labour, front page of the Times this morning, winning over 120 business bosses. How significant is that, do we think?
In my view, almost entirely insignificant, in the sense that, of course, over the last year or two, Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have been, quotes, wooing business. And it's very important for them to be able to say, we are a sensible mainstream party. You shouldn't be frightened of us. We are going to grow the economy. We're going to have the help of all these eminent people. But actually, the fact that eminent businessmen, right at the last minute, cluster to the party which is clearly going to win the election is not, as I say, in itself a huge surprise.
This has been Labour policy and strategy for a very long time. I don't think it's surprising, as Andrew says, that they're going to try and get as close to Labour or the next government as possible and win them over. Labour have made it clear that they want to cozy up to business. Their whole phrase is we're pro-business and pro-worker. They're trying to transcend this dialectic and bring in economic growth through that cooperation. I don't think that's necessarily going to change anything. We already know that Rachel Reeves prioritises business. It's a tactic that politicians use every single election. Blair did it, Cameron did it, Osborne made a big deal about doing it. When they were in opposition, they just want that 100-person list of people that sign a letter to the Times to endorse their policies. It's just a way of reassurance. It won't matter that much.
You've already mentioned, Freddie, touched on Keir Starmer's sort of opening speech.
Yeah.
Country first, party second. I wonder what we think about if there's any jarring between this attempt to woo business and Keir Starmer saying, I'm a socialist. And again, I know Jonathan Reynolds was questioned about this morning.
Well, it's a very interesting. What is the definition of socialist? Age-old question. I do think there is a problem with, as it were, a populist anti-establishment mood in the country. And everybody who's at the top of things, whether the things are banks or big corporations or political parties, all huddling together and say, we all agree with each other. A lot of voters will snarl at that. And therefore, I'm not quite sure how successful it will be in winning over disillusioned, disaffected and angry voters.
On the socialist point, Rachel Reeves came out today and said that she was a social democrat. I think Jonathan Reynolds came out and said he was a Christian socialist, which is interesting. Again, we need to look at their policies and not what they say. Is Keir Starmer a socialist? I'm not sure there's that much evidence of that, whatever he might claim and whatever his history might be. He's been very clear that he's moved in the past 2-3 years away from the left towards the centre. He's adopted an economic consensus that the Tories have created in the past 14 years. I think that's the most important thing, rather than what he might just characterise himself to the BBC.
I mean, touching on how slick or not both campaigns seem to be at the moment, just concentrating on the two largest parties. The attempt to brand Keir Starmer as Sir Sleepy or Sleepy Keir, in line with the Sleepy Joe comments attached to Joe Biden in the States. I mean, it's not working, is it? He's 61, not 81 for a start.
There has to be a grain of truth in any successful political attack. Even if it's unfair, there has to be a sort of core of a little bit of
like a conspiracy
truth
theory.
Exactly. And Keir Starmer is not sleepy. He may not be charismatic. He may be a grey-haired, middle-aged father of two, but he's not sleepy. He was actually out on that very day, bouncing around, meeting voters, making big speeches. It just won't work.
It's a decent moniker for the wrong country or the wrong election. I don't think people in the UK like those who boast about the fact that they work hard. It's not cool. This is not America. We don't have the same sense of meritocratic ideals. I think if Keir Starmer's out winning people over, that's enough. It doesn't matter if he doesn't get up at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and he's dismissed it as desperate.
I'm afraid what is the truth is that 2 years ago, these were two men, Sunak and Starmer, who had a wary respect even basic liking for each other. They're two people who came into politics late, had achieved quite a lot before they came into politics, didn't really go for the down and dirty personal insults that were Boris Johnson's stock in trade. And I think over the past 2 years, they have come to dislike each other quite intensely.
But it's also interesting just on that point, because we always thought this would be quite a presidential campaign. There have been briefings for months from CCHQ and the Tory party that they're going to try and pit Rishi Sunak, this successful business, technocratic, energetic, sprightly, young politician.
No left foot, no left foot.
No, we saw that yesterday, so that's good to clarify. And compare him to Keir Starmer. They were going to go for Keir Starmer's CPS record as DPP, etc., etc. It's interesting now that Rishi Sunak's poll rating is lower than the Tory party. That strategy is not working. They need to try and go for Sleepy Keir, but I think Keir Starmer is probably in a better position to compare himself to Rishi Sunak.
I mean, I think Rishi Sunak is a very, very bright person who is motivated by public service and all the rest of it.
Is he that bright, Andrew?
He's bright.
He's bright, yeah. But I think he's also, in the old phrase, a very, very unlucky general. From that first drenching, which I don't think this campaign is ever going to quite recover from. I think that is the image that will remain in many people's minds when this campaign is over.
I mean, just looking forwards now, they have to get a grip of the narrative. They have to stop the gaffes. They have to contain and constrain where Rishi goes. They need someone with him all the time. They need to get back to basics, to use a term.
Anything else caught your eye over the opening weekend of the campaign, just before we wrap up?
Well, I think the most important thing is I can sense a sort of background weariness already. We kind of know the result, the narrative is set already, and I would encourage people to keep listening and watching very much, because things will happen. They will happen abroad. I'm really worried about what's going on in Ukraine at the moment, and I'm really worried about what's going on in Rafah at the moment. These things will blow back into the campaign in ways that will be unpredictable and interesting. And secondly, this is a campaign like we have never seen before because of the scale of the Tory chaos. And so it's really worth watching just because it is a new event, this, So my main message from this is much more interesting, much more exciting than it may have appeared in the first weekend.
Just before we wrap up, tomorrow we're going to dedicate a lot more time to this, but resignation of some Labour grandees over the weekend saying they're going to not stand. Scoop from my erstwhile colleagues at Newsnight about the investigation into Diane Abbott, apparently completed 6 months ago, and yet Labour's still procrastinating. Thoughts? Quickly.
Well, I have some skin in this game. Diane Abbott came to my wedding. We've known her for a very, very long time indeed. She has been, a prickly and difficult thorn in Keir Starmer's flesh for a long time. She is one of the last of that generation of hard left Labour Party people. But I think, given the way that she has been treated, given all the abuse that she has suffered, it would be extremely ungracious. It's a difficult thing for the Labour Party to decide what to do, because they can see they don't want anything which allows the Tories to say, aha, look, you see, the old Corbynites are coming back, the mask is slipping, and therefore keep her out. On the other hand, I think for most proper-minded, decent voters, it would be ungracious and unfair and rather cruel to take her out right now.
Also, not a great look that Keir Starmer saying last week that the investigation is still ongoing, and yet it appears that, in fact, it was wrapped up.
Yeah, there's huge questions
ago.
there, and also I'm not sure this is so much about how the public perceive it. It's also about the internal party and his own MPs. I think there is a bit of anger about how she's been treated, and people will be concerned about that. And if Keir Starmer is going to win in 6 weeks' time, he needs to be immediately conscious of party unity going into the year ahead.